I'm Nick Kukuru. I'm the Vice President of Ecosystems here at Privitar. And if you probably may not know, Privitar is a privacy technology. And one of our main goals at Privitar is, to be able to use technology to be able to put together, drive the maximum value for data with safety. Our job here is to accelerate insights and increase that agility of data, including data provisioning, and then reduce the risk and maintain compliance, which is pretty much everyone's goal when it comes to privacy. Give you some background on me. I'm a data scientist at heart, so I actually do a lot of the analysis. Some of my best work is basically being able to understand how I can get maximum value out of data and basically provide individuals the experiences that they want. So if there can be, we can. My background is I used to work at MasterCard before Privitar, before that with the SAS Institute. So a lot of good things when it comes to being able to do data analysis. And probably in the last 2 to 3 years, really been working through how to create privacy as we begin to actually develop some of those, the analysis that is being done. So with that said, our main 4 predictions as we take a look at 2021 are real simple. What we look at is, privacy is becoming or is part of a critical investment into digital transformation. And we started to see that kind of towards the end of 2020, as people began to realize the acceleration that COVID brought to us around digital transformation, that privacy needed to be a part of that. And what we're seeing is more and more organizations are starting to sit back and say, what is that technology in order for us to understand that we have to start putting into our stack, into our data flow to ensure that when we do as we go through this digital transformation, privacy is a key component of it. So that's really one of the items. So privacy is a critical investment in digital transformation. We're going to see that continue through 2021 and most likely into 2022. Another item, and we're going to cover each one of these in detail further, but another item is that innovation is driven by sensitive information. So what we're also seeing is as organizations are beginning to take a look at how they can take advantage of that digital transformation and the data that's being now available to them, that there should be the opportunity to be able to say, how do we take that data, that innovation, and that sensitive information that we have around someone, but how do we allow innovation to happen even with sensitive information that's available? So what we're seeing is there's beginning the balance of how we use innovation and how we take care of sensitive information, and then how do we protect that? And again, we're seeing that begin to emerge more and more. We're getting those questions that are coming through to us from both our customers and even from some of the regulatory organizations. The other component is, which is near and dear to my heart, is data privacy is becoming a mainstay in artificial intelligence and machine learning. And I think the problem that people see with it when they think about artificial intelligence and machine learning is, how do you embed privacy inside those algorithms? And the interesting part that I've been finding is, I've built more and more algorithms that are actually introducing privacy and those privacy rules that are there. So allowing AI to take a look at, this is the information I have available to me. This is the information I can actually use. And then here are the decisions that we can make. And it's not just done in batch, it's how we actually embed that data privacy into artificial intelligence as well as machine learning in a stream as well. And then the last part that we're seeing, which has been a big factor probably for the last 3 years, is cloud adoption. And cloud adoption is actually beginning to drive advances in privacy. As we begin to move to the cloud, and as we begin to look at that flexibility that the cloud provides, what we're seeing is privacy is also is driving that flexibility, that scalability, the ability to get more data is actually driving a lot of good advances in data privacy in order to allow us to service our customers. So I think that's a big component of it that we're starting to see. But those 4 big trends: privacy is a critical investment, innovation driven by sensitive information, data privacy becomes a mainstay, and cloud adoption. And David says here is, expanding US data privacy law. The question is how do we become a federal law? So hopefully some of those discussions will be there. I've had the privilege of being on the Hill over the last 2 to 3 years and being able to understand how to begin to talk to our lawmakers up there and begin to build a case for why we need something at the federal level, not just at the state level. I mean, you're right, David, in regards to, you don't want to have 50 different privacy laws. and regulations that are out there. Actually, if you include our territories, you could be at what, 52, 53 different types of privacy laws that can exist. Again, that creates a lot more confusion, and that's not what we want to be able to do. We want to be able to simplify things. So the question is, you know, as we take a look at 2021, will that trend or will that steam pick up back around beginning to do privacy laws at the federal level? So you're right, David. That could be a trend that we'll start to see in 2021. Hopefully that happens and we can build that steam back up. So by 2022, we're in really good discussions in regards to that. So that's a good one. I think as Maria looks out, more regulations. Well, I think the component here is that's part of what we take a look at what David brought up at the federal part. But I think it's in my aspects, I can agree with that. There's going to be some more regulations that we may need, I think. But as we listen to Jason's session just prior to this one, what we're also looking at is for organizations to actually create their own regulations. And when I say that, it's not a government regulation, but an internal one. Those internal standards of how data can be used, how data can be shared, what's the right use of data based upon the different use cases, data usage, and what the organization wants, how it wants to use that data itself. So I think that's a big part of it that we're looking at. The other thing is, as we take a look at these four things, you know, we look at technology and how technology can actually help with that, help with, you know, understanding how AI and ML should be using privacy, how innovation is driven by that sensitive data does, and how does technology begin to be brought into those components. And I think that's a big part. So again, how is that critical investment there? I think the biggest critical investment people see is, you know, you've got to look at technology, and there's a component within that talks about, you know, as we've seen in the last 2 years, data privacy sits there as part of the data flow. And in many respects, what you're seeing and what we're thinking about is data privacy is a component. You've got your data profiling, so understanding the data that's coming in. There's an investment that does need to be made. And we're seeing a lot more of the ETL tools beginning to be able to bring those capabilities to bear. So first and foremost is, what is the data that we are seeing? Can we begin to classify that data or profile it to understand which is personally identifiable, which are regulatory data elements that we should be aware of, whether it's in HIPAA, whether it's in finance, or in some of the other regulated industries. So how do we profile that? That's a component that needs to be invested in. There's a whole world of cataloging, understanding what those would mean. Can we actually put those into the right swim lanes, the data itself? It's the metadata. How does that metadata come into play? So that I can understand not only what that data is as I profile it and I catalog it, but what I should be thinking about and how privacy gets applied within for that data itself, right there inside the metadata. And then using that metadata to create that transparency. So again, you see three big components there, and then you see privacy in itself. And that privacy technology is the ability to manage, the ability for us to manage the different rules, the different regulations that we have to comply with, but in a centralized manner. So those investments in technology, those are the four main ones that you'll start to see more and more organizations putting more emphasis around and putting more dollars around. So I think the bigger part for us is to understand what the ecosystem is and how the different components play into that ecosystem, and then to be able to sit back and be able to play out where those investments should be needed. But again, privacy is now becoming extremely critical across all four of those things, three things I said, the profiling, the cataloging, and the metadata. So I think as you look at it, that's probably where you see a majority of the investment that's being made today are in profiling, metadata, the cataloging, and then the privacy and how to actually manage those rules and how those rules are applied across all of the data sets that are being used through the analysis and for the organization. So Brad brings up a good question here. How can we bridge the gap between policymakers who are not deep on cyber and privacy with privacy companies without bias to actually serving and empowering people? You know, the biggest part when you talk about bridging that gap and talking about making critical investments, it is education. And it's able to make the distinction between cybersecurity and privacy. There is a distinction there. And a lot of people merge those two together and then privacy gets lost in the world of cybersecurity, or really when we talk about being able to protect the network, it becomes just a component, whereas privacy is about actually data usage. It's about how we intend to use that data, how it's being used, who is using it, for what purposes, how it's being consumed, why are we bringing it in. So you've got to start to make those distinctions between the two as you talk about it. So it's a lot of education that gets done that allows you to build the business case for those critical investments, which would take you to the number 2, which is innovation driven by sensitive information. The ability to talk about how privacy can help drive innovation, or helps, being able to build trust, as we hear throughout today, in a brand, and why that innovation is needed, but that trust to be able to protect people's personal data, to be able to protect a person. Data is no longer just data, a 0 and 1. Data is someone, it's a person. It represents a digital persona of people. So being able to discuss and talk with why the investments need to be made in order to drive innovation, but also in many aspects to protect your brand, to protect the organization, protect the people that are entrusting you with their information, which is really themselves. So I think if you take a look at that as you build your business case, there has to be an emotional component of it where people have to understand that these investments aren't just being made to check a box. These investments are being made to protect and build the brand, to be able to build trust in the brand, and also to allow the organization and the individuals to know that there's accountability and responsibility around how their data is, their information, how they are being treated by the organization. So when you take a look at that, how do you do that, right? So, in the third prediction, which is about data privacy becoming a mainstay in AI and ML, that's part of how you start to embed privacy inside the algorithm itself. So in my case, as I build my algorithms to understand how data can be used, it's actually begin to think about, okay, how do I build privacy into that AI? And where is that AI being built? So you think about the computing power that AI helps with, or is being brought to bear on the edge. I've got to build a smart enough algorithm that says, hey, this is the data that I have in front of me. This is the permissions I have around the data itself as an organization. This is the permission, actually, this individual, I have to identify who they are, has given me to be able to communicate with them, or being able to use this information, if I can or cannot, within this algorithm. You're building that if-then statement. If I have all this information, I have all the right permissions, I now can go forward with this type of analysis. If I don't, I got to move down a different path. Well, that's where AI has to actually be very intelligent on the front end. Now, that's if you're using it in a stream. If you're using it in batch, you're given a little bit more time to understand a little more time to actually process the information. But what you're really thinking about is building within that those parameters, or making sure those rules are being applied, which means you're going to need some type of centralized data repository around those rules. And in privacy tech, you got to make that investment so that your AI has the ability to go and keep checking against those rules in case something does change, because they will. The world of privacy is an infinite loop. It's an infinite game. It continuously changes as regulations change, as well as different interpretations by the business, or by business units change from business unit to business unit. So that centralized repository that your algorithm is going to hit up against needs to be there in place. You've got to be able to say, I can enforce these rules, these regulations, and the way we want to use data, I can enforce those, and I've got a central place where I can change them that creates an enterprise level of change, versus trying to do that ad hoc in a siloed manner across different business units and different channels of communication, or different channels of information being provided to individuals. So with that, as you start to take a look at how that's being built into it, the nice part of what we're seeing is, because privacy is at the forefront, and because we have the technology that allows us to be able to do these things, we're now being able to build right there in the algorithm those rules, or applying those rules as part of the code. And then being able to allow that code to change as it goes up against those rules, to say, has anything changed as I'm processing that data? And that's really what the cloud brings to bear as well. So if you take a look at that, the cloud adoption has been really, really good about that. It allows us to have that scale, the ability to bring in a lot of data and information, process it, profile it, put metadata tags on it, But the cloud is also allowing us flexibility and the opportunity to say, understand where we can apply different technology to bear, whether we're doing this in a stream, in a batch. How do we bring that data into us? How do we apply those rules? Are we going to use an API, an SDK? Are we going to do straight integration? Those things the cloud allows us to do has been really good because it frees us up from the complexity that most of our legacy systems have. So as we take a look at that cloud adoption, it does drive what we're seeing in data privacy and how different rules can be applied. Now, the nice part that we're starting to see is the opportunity to begin to think about for us to start taking a look at these different trends and how they actually get applied. So with that, I want to take a step back, allow you guys to ask some more questions in regards to how you're seeing data privacy. And I'm going to see if I can get one of those slides up from some of the help that I'm being received from the folks here at the Rise of Tech. So if you can, put something in the chat around your thoughts. Oh, there you go, Brad. That's a good point. Policymakers do have to focus on the many topics for our country. It's interesting when you talk about it's one of the tens of thousands of policies they need to govern and clearly do, but you know, they are just skimming the surface because in many cases, just like you had brought up, is how do we bridge the gap between cyber and privacy? There's a lot of education that needs to be there. And again, my time spent on the Hill is the opportunity to actually do that education. And part of that is being able to explain how we've evolved from data as zeros and ones. Data, people call it resource. Data is a resource. Data is the new oil. Data is an asset. Data, no. The mindset has to change. Data is a person. And that's where I think the dynamic begins to change at that level for both our lawmakers, as well as our board of directors, as well as our managers who are working with the data. When you start to think of data as a person, those things around privacy begin to come up, which is the ethical use of it, right? I mean, everyone asks about what are those wonderful rules around ethics, and we've got papers that have been written about it, but it comes down to, as we think about any of these when we make an investment in information, is the opportunity to say, if data is a person now, and it is, how do we want to treat that individual? And are we doing the right thing by that individual? Are we applying the golden rule? Are we applying the other rule that says, hey, whatever I don't want to have printed on the front page of the newspaper or in social media, then I should be rethinking about what I'm about to do? When you start to take that mindset, the conversation does change, because people do realize you're now talking about them. They're now talking about an individual. And that is what we have to do and educate people. Privacy is about an individual. It is not about a 0 or 1. It's about an individual. When we can do that, then your conversation begins to change with your board, with lawmakers, with your colleagues, right? It changed for me about 15 years ago when people started to have that conversation with me as I looked at my analysis, which I was trying to do very well. And they're like, remember, someone is on the receiving end of that marketing material, or someone's on the either end of that acquisition campaign, or et cetera. And I started to realize, they're right. So I think that's a component of it that also gets built into how you use technology to make that investment, because there is technology out there. And we at Privitar is one of them that in top of our mind as we do our development is how we can bring the ethics into those rules and how we can enforce them to help be able to understand that data is people. People need privacy. People want privacy. And if we build that privacy, they get trust. So there you go, David. How can privacy standards be developed for all businesses yet still be specific enough for certain industries? Well, that's where you start to take a look at what we would say the data usage of it, right? There are certain businesses and certain industries that have the far-reaching regulatory standards. And I think that's what comes from the regulatory body. And that's what you're looking to be able to say in that investment. I can do an enterprise level based upon the regulatory bodies and the rules that they have in place. But then that technology now becomes specific to the data itself. So I'm a big proponent of data usage and the data element, and is now more important than just the overall regulation or just the overall, hey, I think I've protected that. So when I look at that, what I think about is the opportunity to go say, I can provide protection, not just at the broader business or industry level. I can provide protection at the data, the data mart, the data domain, you may call it, the data set at that level. So I can actually begin to expand and say within the organization, what are our standards around marketing? What are our standards around acquisition? What, if I'm in financial services, fair lending, how do I apply them to our analysis for both campaigns for acquisition, campaigns for support, campaigns for retention? How do I begin to look at each one of the way that we're going to use that data set that I'm going to use in that regard to do the analysis? And again, it can be different than, let's say, if I'm just providing a report for Basel regulations, or for CCAR or whatever. There's a different world there. Again, I'm looking at the usage now, getting to the element level. And that's where when you talk about making an investment in privacy, that technology, am I allowed to do that? That becomes real important as one of the key capabilities that need to be driven for that. So you got to sit back and say, can I do that at that level? When I look at the business and specifically the data usage, can I make this rule of being collaborative, policy creation? So I can bring compliance, get their opinion of what this has to be done. They can put into the policy, business, as well as technology. So all three of those need to be at the table when you look at making that investment. When you look at about how to drive that into AI, you look at those components and say that technology needs to have some type of collaboration for that policy creation, both at the high level, at the data use, at the business unit level, and then even down to the data set level for specific use cases. So applying privacy is different based upon the use case from my perspective, and based upon usage. So hopefully that helps you out. So if you take a look at actually part of your question is social media privacy versus different than vehicle privacy. That's where you've got to, those are the two aspects of it. So social media privacy, okay, that's really about emotions of an individual. Vehicle safety is not about just the individual. It's about making sure that that road is safe. So how much information are you going to process in a vehicle is going to be a lot more potentially, and apply it saying, I need to understand what's going on, including if there is an accident that I can notify, someone that something has happened, hopefully to protect or to save a life, or to help and get someone the medical care that they need if there's an accident. Again, you got to take a look at the usage there. When it comes to vehicles, we're all about safety. We're all about protection. We're all about making sure that that vehicle is going to be part of the flow of traffic, and it doesn't impede that. When it talks about social media, completely different sets of usages when it comes there. Again, when you look at the differences between those two, when you look at technology, it's like, how do I apply this based upon usage? And then the data set that will support that use case based upon the usage that we need, based upon who's going to be consuming it and for what reasons. So, Megan, you're right. In the privacy journey, where do we start? Where do you start if you're just starting down the privacy journey? Do you set up a privacy center of excellence? The goal is you're going to get there for a privacy center of excellence. I think the first thing I always tell people is you got to take inventory. So whether you're making an investment in technology, in people, how to embed it in an AI, you got to start taking that first step is, okay, I just need to understand where I am at within privacy. Am I doing it by just, basically it's a gap analysis. It's in that journey is just get that inventory of, are all the business units have different rules for themselves? Basically they're siloed. Am I moving up into, can I move that to a centralized aspect where I have a central repository where I have my rules and my regulations that people can refer to bring into their business? And then eventually you are moving towards a privacy center of excellence that can reside in the CDO office if you have one. It can be in the privacy office if you have one. It can even be in technology if that's the only place you have it. But as you begin this journey, it's understanding first where you're at, then how do I begin to move towards an opportunity where I can centralize, where I can be collaborative, and then how do I move from there to here? Most people right now, when they start out their journey, they're in silos. Marketing is doing one thing, business side is doing one thing, operations is doing one thing, legal is trying to corral it all to make sure that we're being, everyone's following the rules. But as you start to take a look at where that journey begins, you want to sit back and say, okay, how do I bring everyone to the table to get out what's needed? And once you figure that out, then you start to need to determine the technology that's going to be needed to support not just one business unit, but all of the business units. When people talk about with me a lot is like, how do I make that first investment? You're looking for an investment that's going to satisfy as much of the organization as you can, not just your world. That investment, especially in privacy, needs to go across the organization, because privacy is the one area that can really affect your brand in a positive and a negative way. What people don't realize, the positive aspects of privacy and being able, when people get trust and responsibility, has really been coming out these last 2 or 3 years as we've looked at GDPR. Everyone was afraid if GDPR puts on regulations, I will lose business, I will do this. What we have found, though, is those organizations in the European Union who have really embraced it, and people have found that trust, their market share, their share of wallet have actually risen. So people are watching. So privacy has that effect on brand. And that's why you're saying, and when I make this investment in technology, this investment can help all of these business units. And that's generally how I look to build a business case, especially when I look at these 4 trends. This privacy technology can help my AI and ML, my analysis group. It can help my risk group by being able to create that transparency that's needed. It can help my technology team to understand how it works in my data flow. So it's complementary to the data flow. It's not basically a rip and repair. It's complementary. And as a result, now I'm touching all the aspects to it. So it's a good question, Megan. Do I create centralized or not? The question is, you're eventually going to get there. It's where your starting point is and how you determine that. What about FB? From what I've seen, their user rate has not dropped after their privacy scandals. Thanks, David. Facebook, you got it. But well, that's just it. So if you take a look at Facebook, you're absolutely right. There's been a lot of privacy scandals there. But when you look at Facebook, and I've looked at the different academic reports and the different surveys, is Facebook has a different norm in regards to privacy, which is interesting. People's aspect of Facebook is it's a public forum. If I put something on Facebook on a public page, not in a private page, but if I put something on a public page, that means it is open for everyone to see. And I want everyone to see that for that fear of missing out. So what you've got there is, you now start to understand, is like, people have, right, wrong, or indifferent, there's a whole conversation that could be had over beers on this one, is people are sitting there going, if I put anything on Facebook in a public domain, I've already told myself I've given up my rights to privacy. That's what some surveys have said. I know I'm being black and white, and there are some gray areas there, but that's a component to it as well. So that's when you take a look at the privacy technology you're using in the space, and you want to be able to say that's about the consumption. If I'm putting something out on a Facebook public page, which is now the consumption aspect to it, what are the different ways I want that information to be represented, right? So now it's out in the public domain. So now you're like, what do I want to make sure of when I put it out there, that I'm complying with what now the norm is, which is it's in public. Now, if it's in a private area on Facebook, that's a different story, because then people believe at that point they've made the distinction between my private Facebook and my public-facing Facebook. They're already making that distinction. And they haven't dropped because people still want to be social. People still are trusting that Facebook gets their message out. So they don't want to drop it. They don't want to have that fear of missing out. which has really been interesting because I really had anticipated, probably similar to you, David, that their numbers would have dropped, but they haven't. And again, to me, I think the most logical one, I think, was the report that came out of, I don't know if it was Harvard or Oxford, one of them, that either one of them, that started to take a look at that phenomenon that people are making their own decisions on their own privacy. And Facebook is a good example of how that has organically been developing that, right? Or people have been developing this mindset around privacy in themselves, and they've been using Facebook to play that out. So yeah, you're right. Well, the thing is, if we take a look at it, David, is I think the one thing that we look at is in communications with someone, when you have private versus public. And again, you want to make sure your technology is there. So when I think of private versus public and I apply it to a general world of operations, I think of, I'm going to create a marketing campaign, right, that goes out there to the public, and I want to have certain things on it. But in a private world, if a customer calls my call center and they want to have something, they're just probably calling for resolution of something or to ask questions, then I need to have that individual's information available to that call center rep. So now that's in a private aspect because someone is now coming to me to get information. So now, from a privacy rule standpoint, the data set that is used for my customer service folks, that domain, that data domain, I have protected it to allow certain things that they need, right? They need to know the person's individual name. They probably, if it's a financial services, the last set of transactions that have gone through, the history of that individual and those transactions. That's private. That's a lot of information. And I'm exposing some of that PII to that customer service rep. Now, from a marketing standpoint, to determine if I want to do acquisition, well, if I want to do that analysis, I don't need all that information to do my analysis of who's most likely to do something or purchase something until I've identified all those individuals. So they're all de-identified until I say, here's the 10,000 people that should respond positively to this campaign for acquisition. Now I re-identify these individuals to put that out into the public domain. There's a different concept because along the way of that path, I don't know who they are when I was doing the analysis versus the customer service rep when you called. They're bringing up your file. They know who you are most likely, where you live, and your transactions. They know a lot more information than potentially an analyst like me who's just trying to build out certain analyses or campaigns or produce reports for the organization. So if I take a look at, as we look at this, the trends that you guys are talking about are all things, these are additional trends, is the ability to say, you could add a fifth. How do we begin to take a look at privacy, public versus private, internal versus external? How do we want to take a look at privacy when we take a look at that? And technology needs to support that. How do we ensure cross-border information that is being shared can be shared cross borders, especially in this global environment? So that's all part of it as you take a look at that world of we take a look at the cloud, even though we've got a worldwide cloud, it's like how we actually manage within that cloud and that flexibility in the cloud to apply and be able to do these aspects of when we do data sharing or create a data marketplace, which a lot of organizations are looking at. How do we use the cloud to be able to apply those rules where I can cross borders with data, what data could be used cross borders, how it is used cross borders to do analysis. So I can find out what additional things are happening in my organization or with my customer base. So that's the trends that you're looking for in the analysis. Can I do that? Am I allowed to do that? And I have to have a place that says yay or nay, instead of making 25 phone calls, which can turn into, 3 months of data provisioning to see if I can even do the analysis to do this, to have technology that allows me to data provision within 24 hours, or to be able to go into technology and be able to say, hey, these are the things I'm looking to do. Can I do them? And get your answer in hours or minutes versus weeks and months. Again, that's the difference is when you start taking a look at how I use or look at the technology that I'm looking for. The opportunity to say, I want to have data sharing. I've got to start putting privacy in my AI and ML to do my analytics. How and what technology can support that? Can it really support me if I need to have streaming access? Does it support me if I take a look at batch? How does it? Is it an API, et cetera? So again, how does that technology fit into my overarching organization, especially in digital transformation, where streaming and batch come into play? You know, back in the day, we called it a Lambda architecture, where batch and streaming would meet in a service layer. Well, now we're in the world of Kafka, right? Kappa architecture, sorry. Kappa architecture, where it's all in one stream. Because of the Internet of Things and the digital transformation, how do I use technology to apply privacy in that streaming world right there on the edge, so that I can understand and I don't go against any of the policies that I've placed as an organization, or the policies of my industries or regulations of my industries have placed upon me. So as we're coming up to time, it's 11:40, and I've done a whole lot of talking. I wish I could have I've shared some of the slides that I had laid out for you. But I could share them with you if you'd like afterwards. You can definitely drop me a line, or go to our booth to get the brief slide deck that we had set up and prepared. Again, as I take a look at these things, and I want to go back and reiterate the 4 trends and the opportunity and what you should be looking at within them. So to summarize, if you're looking at privacy as a critical investment in digital transformation, you need to be able to, when companies do that and being able to make that investment, you should be asking the question, how does this technology safely and ethically allow us to use data to make that competitive advantage that we're looking for? Can it accelerate data provisioning for me? Will it allow us, this investment, to increase the value of our data so that we can serve our customer base or find new customer bases, right? Or for governments to be your constituents. And does this technology allow me to reduce privacy risk? When you ask those 3 questions around making that investment, and the answer is, this is how it accelerates data provisioning for us. It allows a centralized data repository. It enables us the opportunity to be able to have someone go to that and be able to ask the question of, I want to use data this way. Will I be allowed to it? What data is available to me? And they can get those answers in, again, hours to a day versus weeks and months. Then yes, that technology is good. Is it going to increase the value of our data for our organization? In other words, not only inside the organization, but what other data can we bring in? Does it increase the value of that to allow us to service our customers and to allow our customers to understand that we're being responsible and accountable? And which is about reducing that privacy risk, which also means you're reducing your brand risk. So when say we have a privacy risk, what I tell people is privacy and brand do go together. And then on the second item, as I take a look at it, innovation driven by sensitive information. And that's what you're looking at when you start to make that move. So again, your question there is, if I'm looking at technology and I want to create innovation, I need to know that to drive that innovation with sensitive information, the data is protected. And it can be protected in multiple ways. It's not a one size fits all. It's not just tokenization. It's different levels, different ways to do tokenization. It's different ways to do perturbation of data, things of that nature. Do I have different tools in my toolbox that will protect that data based upon the usage, based upon how we want to consume it, based upon the information we know? Which means, is that usability preserved? So again, in some cases with the one size fits all, which I have seen, all of a sudden they're like, here's your data set. And it's like, well, I can't use this because this is the data that I need, or the information, the data element that I need. And it's either missing or it has now been encrypted. And I don't understand what that key data element is for me, that variable that I need that's going to allow me to do something. So again, are we taking that technology in order to drive innovation? Do we preserve data usability? And then is remediation given? So if something does happen, do I have the opportunity to go back and find out the who, the what, the where, and when? Again, when I worked at MasterCard, our account data compromise team, and working through audits and working with them and seeing what they went through forensically, that's an important concept right there. Is through this sensitive information, can I do remediation if something does happen, which is going to go to being able to reduce the overall organization's risk, which means you're reducing your brand risk if something happens, which then means you're mitigating your privacy risk. See how they begin to get put together? And then at number 3, data privacy becomes a mainstay in AI and ML. And for me, the questions you're asking around that, is the technology that I'm going to apply for privacy, is it going to allow me to do privacy by design and default across all of my data analytics platform, whether they're on-prem or in the cloud? Are my models, does this technology allow me to build in my models, my algorithms, privacy? How do I do that? Will this technology allow me to do that? Will allow my analysts to do that so that we can apply it both on the edge of the Internet of Things or internally when we want to do batch? Is privacy embedded into the data flow? Are we adding those attributes into the metadata? Are we allowing those in the data profiling within the metadata? Are they being applied so that my models know that the data that's in there is valid, first and foremost, but it's also being protected? The privacy rules in an organization or an industry are being applied, so I'm safe. And then is there full transparency? If my AI model makes a decision, is that technology in privacy going to allow me to have full transparency to explain how that decision was made? This is really important when it comes to your world of HIPAA or you come into the financial sector world, when you have to be able to talk about it, especially when it comes to fair lending. And then number 4, if I take a look at 4, cloud adoption will drive advances. The questions you need to be asking yourself there, when you look around cloud advances, is this technology going to help me shed the complexity of our legacy systems, right? When you go to the cloud native services and applications generally are less complex than we've already been building for the last 20, 25 years. So does this technology and privacy help me shed some of that complexity? Will allow me to be scalable, will allow me to be repeatable. And then starting with the privacy protection from the outset, does the cloud allow, and that's what the cloud enables me, the cloud that you would go to should enable right at the beginning. If you're moving or migrating to the cloud, one of the first things they should be asking is, how are we embedding privacy in there? And a lot of the cloud providers are doing that right now. So again, how do we start with privacy versus what we've been doing for the past 5 years? How do we bring it in? Now we can say we can start from a clean slate. And when we have that opportunity, when you start to move into the cloud, and then of course, does that cloud give me the opportunity to apply privacy as scalable and be flexible enough to take advantage of the additional compute power the cloud gives me? So again, does that technology allow me to do that? So those are some of the questions that can be asked as we take a look at it. We are coming up to time. I have enjoyed being with you for the session. And again, if you'd like to be able to, Megan has put in the chat window where you can go to Privitar to get the deck slides that I just went through with you in a speed round. Also, I want to let you know that there is, for Data Privacy Day, which is coming up, we have a whole hub of data privacy content and materials that can help you understand where you are within your journey, things to consider, depending on where you are at in the world as well. So there's a whole host of material and contents out there that can help you understand, as we look at privacy, as we look at technology in privacy, how to answer some of the questions around we just talked about, as well as some questions you may have. So take advantage of that hub that we have out there to learn some more. Of course, take advantage of the rest of today here at the Rise of Privacy Text Data. It's always a great forum to talk with folks. And if you can, please reach out to me if you want, and continue the conversation. As you can tell, love to be able to talk about privacy, love to be able to talk more about how it gets embedded into analysis, being a data scientist at heart, and just continuing the conversation. Thank you so much. Oh, one last thing. There is a session that I just did with In Confidence with Michelle Dennedy, the former CPO, or the Chief Privacy Officer for both Cisco and McAfee. That is going to be put out on our channels. She had a lot of great insights in there on where to start as well, what those first steps are. So if you can, it's called In Confidence. You can get a link out there. And it was a really good interview. Michelle did some really good, it was really good, material that she covered. Especially it was real world. It's what she's been going through for the last 10 or 15 years. And she actually has taken part in today's event as well. So again, thanks again. Enjoy the rest of your day. And hopefully I'll be talking with you soon.